But when you put colonies and trade and sea power together, that's a powerful combination. This is the Duc de Choiseul. He was the foreign minister for Louis XV, Louis XV, the son of Louis XIV. And he made this comment in the middle of the 18th century during the midst of these colonial wars that we'll be talking about. He said, in the present state of Europe, it is colonies, trade, and in consequence, sea power, which must determine the balance of power upon the continent. The house, the monarchy, the House of Austria, Russia, the King of Prussia are only powers of the second rank, as are all those who cannot go to war unless subsidized by the trading powers. And the trading powers are the ones who have got overseas colonies. And of course, who's got a big overseas colony in North America? The French do. Who's got a big overseas colonies in North America? The English do. Difference, by the way, this is significant. The French had one unified colony. And the English had 13 separate colonies. That matters. Now, okay, so the cycle of wars between England and France begin in 1689. And I want you to look at the names here. The first of these wars in Europe is called the War of the League of Augsburg. Now, don't worry about what the heck that means. It doesn't matter. But in the colonies, it was known as King William's War. What's going over there in Europe? I don't know. King William and King of France are fighting. Well, I guess that means we have to fight too. There's French settlers over there. We're English. We have to go fight them. But I mean, they were fighting essentially because their monarch overseas was fighting. Did the League of Augsburg mean anything to them? Did they have any particular dog in that particular fight? No, they fought because their monarch was at war. Same thing with the War of the Spanish Succession. In Europe at this time, it was very important who sat on the throne of any given monarchy, because let's say, because it's all family stuff. So let's say I'm in the House of Bourbon, that's the way that the French kings were. And let's say that there's a succession crisis in Spain. It's not clear, who the legitimate successor is. And one of the claimants to the throne happens to be, in the House of Bourbon too. My cousin, has a claim to that. Well, great thing about it is, if he gets on the throne of Spain, all of a sudden, I've got tremendously more power because I got a built-in ally from then on. So people would go to war, over which claimant to a disputed throne was actually going to get to sit on the throne. And this War of the Spanish Succession went on for 13 years, 1701 to 1714. And over in the colonies, it's like, what's going on? Well, Queen Anne's at war with the French. I guess we're at war with the French too. So, there would be more raids and counter raids and so on between the English and the French, mostly in New England and in upstate New York. Okay. Time goes on. Next time, the Austrian succession is up for grabs. Well, who's on the throne then? Well, King George II, I think, at this point. So King George is second's over there, and he's at war with France, and so I guess we're at war with France too. So, I mean, at one level, this just seems almost inane from a colonist perspective, but it really isn't. First of all, you've got patriotism involved. You've got a sense of community, fealty with the mother country. Second thing is there is this sense of religious rivalry between the ardently Protestant Puritans living in the New England area and the Catholics who comprise New France. So there's that. And then there's this additional thing. Take a look at this map. Look at it carefully. Along the Atlantic seaboard, you can see, going from north to south, New England, New York, Pennsylvania, the Chesapeake colonies, which we're talking about Eastern Maryland and Virginia, um, the lower South, that would include part of North Carolina, South Carolina, and Georgia. And then there's the back country, which is also controlled by um, English settlers. So we're not dealing with colonies exactly. We're talking about settled areas. Okay, so those areas are all settled, to one degree of density or another by the English, and they're running up against the Appalachian Mountains. So as the population increases and as there is a desire for additional land, additional farmland, where are they going to get it from? Everything east of the Appalachian Mountains is taken. They're going to have to get it from beyond the Appalachian Mountains. Well, who controls that? Well, the French did. Now look at the French Empire. Notice how it's a kind of a ribbon that runs from, let's go to the north. You see it says New France, and you can see that this river, there's a river that you're looking at, and that is the St. Lawrence River. It runs to Lake Ontario, which runs to Lake Erie, which runs to Lake Huron, Lake Michigan, and that's all part of New France. And then it goes down the Mississippi River to New Orleans. And this French colony, this French empire, is actually does not have a great deal of population to it. It is essentially a trading colony. They do a lot of trade with Native Americans. So what's important with New France, as it's called, it's not the French population of New France. No, it is the military control that the French military forces in New France have over basically the entire Mississippi River Valley, certainly the Ohio country. And the Ohio country is, the next best thing for the English colonists when it comes to further expansion. And, the English colonists are not slow to realize that if these wars between the English and the French are going to continue, it would be a good thing if one of the outcomes would be the destruction of French military power in North America, which would open up that Ohio country to English settlement. So something interesting happens during King George's War, or the Austrian Succession. Here's another map. All right. Now, let's start this time the southern part of this map. You see Boston, right? That's the heart of the Puritan settlements. That's in Massachusetts. And then these New Hampshire, Vermont, these places don't exist yet. They're just, they're just there to help us give an orientation to where things are. Okay? But you go up beyond Vermont, Lake Champlain, you get to Montreal. That is one of the key French cities in New France. And then you go northeast of Montreal, that takes you down the St. Lawrence River Valley, and that takes you to Quebec. And Quebec is the capital of New France. It is the largest city, and it is strategically very well placed to control the St. Lawrence River, and by extension, the St. Lawrence River Valley. If you could ever get control of Quebec, that would be like having your hands on the throat of New France, if you could ever get there. But in the meantime, no way the New England colonists are going to get to Quebec. That ain't going to happen. But there's this town on Cape Breton Island. It's called Louisbourg. And Louisbourg is a fortress town, and it controls the mouth of the St. Lawrence River estuary. That's the main way that French shipping gets in and out of New France and heading on to France, heading back to France, has to go through the body of water between Louisbourg and that next island to the northeast. Furthermore, Louisbourg is a port from which French privateers can and do set forth to raid British shipping and the shipping of English colonists as well. What a privateer is a kind of a legally licensed pirate. What you would be is, you say, let's say you're a merchant vessel captain. In peacetime, you got your merchant vessel and you're carrying, rum to, New Bedford and codfish from Maine and, this kind of thing. And life's fine. You're making a good living. The war comes and you get some cannon, you put some cannon on that merchant vessel of yours. And you get something called a letter of marque and reprisal. That's spelled M-A-R-Q-U-E, letter of marque and reprisal. You get it from someone who represents the authority of the king. And that gives you the legal permission to go after the shipping of the enemy that you're dealing with. So in the case of the French, these French privateers had the legal authority to go after British and English colonial shipping. Well, that ain't so good. And so the British government thought it'd be a good idea to take out Louisbourg, but we got other things to do. We can't bother ourselves with the resources involved with an expedition to take out Louisbourg. So the New Englanders said, we'll do it. And they are already in the throes of something called the Great Awakening. And this is a major religious revival and a landmark in the formation of American religious culture. And inspired by this religious episode, New England clergy made the Louisbourg expedition a crusade against the Catholic heathen, the popish fish eaters, the French, and of course their heathen Indian allies. So you've got New England merchants and government officials and people who are interested in getting rid of French power so they can get to the Ohio country. And now you've got the backing of the clergy, whose influence in Puritan New England was powerful. You put it all together, and the New Englanders were able to organize and execute an expedition to capture Louisbourg more or less on their own. Get this, 4,000 men under William Pepperell by name, the president of the Massachusetts Council, also militia colonel, merchant. He's in charge of the whole thing. So Massachusetts is providing the manpower, but Rhode Island, New York, Pennsylvania, and New Jersey provide ships or provisions. And they end up heading to Louisbourg by sea with 15 armed ships, some of them Royal Navy. The British government does throw in a little bit of help here, and 100 transports to transport the men and the supplies. And the colonists landed on Cape Breton Island, where Louisbourg is, and they were assisted in their operation to capture Louisbourg by serious French mistakes, which I won't go into, but I will say it's fortunate that the French made mistakes because the colonists made some serious mistakes of their own. One attempted assault fizzled when the 800 participants showed up drunk. A subsequent assault commenced with a secret night landing near the objective, but it failed when some drunken fool proposed 3 cheers for the successful surprise landing. And alerted by this folly, the French counterattacked, killed 19 colonists, and took over 100 men prisoner. But nevertheless, Louisbourg fell in June 1745 after a 3-month siege. But the colonists, once they took control of Louisbourg, were bitterly disappointed by the lack of booty or the lack of loot. Okay. When you capture an area like that, all these French vessels that are in harbor, so for these things you can, they're yours now. They're prizes. And there's other things in Louisbourg that you can have now that you've captured it. Okay. Well, the available loot, half of it went to the crown, the monarch. Half of it went to the Royal Navy officers. Well, the king hadn't done very much at all. He sent a few ships, and the Royal Navy officers, they contributed a portion of the naval power behind this expedition and none of the land power. But they got all the loot. What the New Englanders had to do was a sizable colonial garrison was ordered to remain. And the way that colonists thought about war, and they went off to war, they went off as sort of as citizen soldiers, and they went off with the idea that they were on a specific mission. They had a sort of a contract. Okay, I'm joining up, to serve for this length of time under this particular officer for this particular purpose, and that's the contract. And as long as the contract's observed, I'm in. But if the contract is broken, I'm out. I don't have any obligation to stick around. Well, these guys, their contract, as far as they were concerned, was to go to Louisbourg, capture Louisbourg, end of story. Turns out they're ordered by the British to stay and garrison Louisbourg, which means that they're staying away from their wives and their loved ones and their friends and their favorite tavern and all this kind of stuff in Louisbourg, where 800 of them by the end of the war. The war goes on for another year. 800 of them died of disease. It's 8 times more than the number actually killed in action. I'm sorry, we're talking about 3 years. It's 1748 before this thing ends. Okay. Now, that's enough to tick you off. But here's the real kicker. 1748, there's a treaty. It's called the Treaty of Aix-la-Chapelle. It's now the German town of Aachen. Everybody gets together for a peace treaty, and as part of the peace settlement, the British government restores Louisbourg to France as part of a general return of conquests. So the French, we get Louisbourg back, but you can get this, British area that we took. Well, you get that one back too. So it's kind of like everybody gets back what they had at the beginning of the war. And from a British standpoint, this makes perfect sense. From the New Englander standpoint, this is an outrage. And it's an important illustration of Anglo-colonial friction engendered by military efforts that they carried out nominally in common. Because just because they were fighting together doesn't mean they got along together. And the outcome of the Louisbourg expedition is one example of that.